Hi, Jodi. Good to hear you. Great. Thank you for having me on.
So, do you want to start with telling us why? I guess you're an advocate. First of all, I mean, I know you're an alienated father, but tell them how that happened, because I know yours was later.
Right. Yes, the last 5 years have been something that I never, ever would have anticipated. And it's really opened my eyes up to a lot of things in the court system, in the way that the law works in the state of Texas, and not just Texas, but throughout the country. So I think probably the first thing, and I'm going to, if at any time you want to change directions with me, let me know, but I'll go back. The best place to start is at the beginning, huh? And we'll get back up to the present pretty quickly here. So about 4 years ago, I went through a divorce. My ex-wife served me with divorce papers, and it was a no-fault divorce. Nobody around thought we should have gotten divorced at the time. There was nobody, literally nobody, who thought that. And there had been things going on in our marriage, and I think like any marriage, there's always two people, so it's not necessarily one person did this or the other person did that, but there are the struggles, and you're supposed to work through them. That's what marriage is, the marriage covenant, the marriage contract is about. And I was a little bit surprised to see some of the things that I was accused of. As you know, Jodi, you've seen pictures of my grandchildren. You've seen pictures of my stepson, Matt, who has just recently gotten out of the hospital. We thought he was going to die about 2-3 weeks ago, and we're fortunate. Matt was born with a brain aneurysm, or he had a brain aneurysm in utero, so he actually was born dead and revived. And he's going to be with us for his entire life. So we have everything that we have to think about with Matt's medical needs. I'm married to a wonderful woman, Karen, love her dearly. I'm so glad to have met her. But to go back to the whole system here, I was surprised at how quickly in divorce, a divorce can take place. And I was surprised how if you're the person that divorce is filed against, you basically have no rights in the state of Texas. I always thought that the Constitution, the due process clauses of the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment meant something, that you could not be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. But when it comes down to no-fault divorce, all it is an allegation, and there is no due process. You're considered guilty just by virtue of the fact that somebody says you're guilty or whatever. Right. So, and I was surprised because,
Completely the opposite of a criminal.
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, that's a very interesting point you made, because I kind of thought to myself, it's too bad I were not accused of raping somebody or murder, because at least that way I would have had the presumption of innocence. But when you're in divorce, you have no presumption of innocence. So anyway, within 3 months we were divorced, and you're in complete shock over the whole thing. I mean, your life is torn upside down. You never anticipated this. It had an effect on the family. Kids went back and forth, and I myself am a child of divorce too, so I know some of the emotions that the kids go through. They why aren't our parents together? They blame their mother, they blame their father. And some really bad things were said, and my mother used to be upset. My mother's in Pennsylvania, and I said, Mom, let it go. Just don't do anything. They need a lightning rod right now. Just don't say anything. I understand the emotions of the whole matter. And, so you work through some of that stuff.
When you were going through this, Jeff, how old were your kids?
Well, that was 5 years ago, so I believe my oldest was, I've kind of lost track of their ages. I think the oldest was 23 at the time, so it was kind of like 18 to 23, something along that line right now. And so anyway, but that was the first thing that I saw, that I looked at the way laws conducted with families in Texas, and I just thought, I have no defense. Nobody has a defense. And I heard that. But it's not until you experience it that you realize how bad it is. But so after this took place here, I started to rebuild the relationship with my kids and everything, because like I said, they were all over the place. They went back and forth. And my daughter, my youngest daughter, Stephanie, got pregnant right after my ex-wife filed for divorce. And it was, when you have divorce and things happen, it tends to affect the kids. So she is now a single, unwed mom. And I gave up everything. I thought to myself, I had 2 daughters. My one son, he's pretty much on his own, and he's smart. He's got a trade and everything. I had 2 daughters, and I'm thinking to myself, what do I do for my daughters? We had been missionaries in the Middle East, and most missionaries don't make a lot of money. So, of course, most missionaries don't get divorced either, but that's something that happens these days. But we did have a house, and I thought the only thing I could do for my kids, my girls, is to say if they have a place to stay for free, at least it will help them go to school. It will give them something. I'll do what I can. And of course, I kept them on my insurance. There's a lot I could have done against my ex-wife legally that I just said I won't do, because by doing so I would hurt my children. So I walked away from a lot of stuff. But anyway, like I said, my youngest daughter and I, Stephanie, she had the first son. His name is Cruz. She didn't let me know when he was born. My insurance covered him, but she kind of kept me away from him. And then I think she invited me out to see him shortly after he was born. So I went to see him, loved the little baby, but I thought to myself, what do I do? Because this baby's going to be growing up confused already. How come I have so many grandparents or whatever? That's not right. So I was willing to say, maybe it's best for me not to be there. And then I thought, you know what? I love my grandson. And I was close to him. And so, later on, I started to babysit him a little bit. And then, lo and behold, Stephanie was living with my ex-wife. And my ex-wife had evidently made life so miserable for her that she started staying with friends and everything else. Eventually went back to her old boyfriend, got pregnant a second time. So now there's 2 children. And I'm just like, I don't even know what to do. But my ex-wife had remarried 10 months after she got her divorce. So whether anything was happening there or not, that's up for somebody else to decide. But she, again, after she had the second child, from what I heard, she just did not, she had lost her temper with my daughter Stephanie and basically told her to move. Well, my daughter, of course, single mom, 2 children under the age of 1.5 years. What is she going to do? And then Stephanie called me and said, Dad, can I put some furniture in your place? Mom's going to throw out my stuff. So I had a house at this point, so I stored her stuff. And then when she needed an apartment, who did she go to co-sign on the apartment? The man who was supposed to, it was me. I was the one who co-signed on the apartment. She got into the apartment. She started to get a job, and I would babysit the kids. I love the kids. My youngest grandson, Gideon, spent hours and hours with him. He had colic, and I'd walk with him and hold him, and because the moment he sat down, he'd start to cry. So I'd be up walking, dead tired, just holding him and loving him. I was so close to Gideon. And, but so my wife Karen was wonderful. As I mentioned, we have Matt, and Matt is another wonderful guy, but he's got all of the medical issues. So when I would babysit the kids, sometimes they'd be playing on Matt's hospital bed, because Matt has about 8 breathing machines. We almost run an ICU in our house. We've got 24-hour nursing care. And Cruz and Gideon would sometimes just play on Matt, play on his bed, and Matt would be smiling and everything else. And my daughter would always be needing a babysitter, so I would always volunteer because nobody else was helping her. And I loved the kids. So we took them places with Matt and everything else. I just loved Matt. Well, it turned out that several months after that, my daughter got mixed up with another guy. And he was not a good person. He controlled her, abused her, did things that, I'm not going to mention right here. But in the midst of all of this, I believe what he did, he convinced her that I was the enemy. And part of the reason was because during this stuff, who was the one who was protecting her? I was the one who was protecting her. I was the one who was watching the kids, who was making sure that they were okay. But he wanted to be the new dad. He wanted to say that these were my kids. There were a lot of abusive things that took place with him, from what I gather, but I didn't see a lot of them. Anyway, so it turned out that my daughter got my youngest grandson circumcised at 10.5 months of age. And prior to that, he had a couple of surgeries that I paid for, but the circumcision thing was brand new. I didn't know what was going on. and it got infected. So when he went down to the hospital, and Stephanie called me, didn't call her mom, called me, said, can you have Karen, my wife, go down and help her? So Karen's down there helping her and everything, and I was out of state when this whole thing happened. And it turns out that that while she's in the hospital, somebody from Children's Protective Services evidently comes in, and once Gideon is out of the hospital, Children's Protective Services visits my daughter. And somehow, because I had mentioned in the past that Children's Protective Services, be careful of them, they do things, you don't want them involved in your life. She blamed, because I told her about that, she blamed me for that. And it was incredible. Nobody could believe that that had taken place. I had done so many things to help her out and everything. Well, it turned out that that wasn't enough. Later on, she sued me. She sued me because
CPS never did take Gideon, right?
No, in fact, the interesting thing is, I can't tell you what they did, because at that point she kicked me out of her life, and she said that I was bitter and that I would never see them again. I had no idea what was going on. But CPS, I started to make phone calls to find out what happened. I called up Children's Medical Hospital, and Children's Medical Hospital hemmed and hawed, but eventually I found out who CPS was. I found out who the caseworker was. I called the caseworker. I was working in Arkansas. I called the caseworker at least half a dozen times. I talked with an attorney because to find out what's going on here, what could be done possibly, and the caseworker talked with my wife, Karen, and Karen told the caseworker, listen, her father and I have done all of these different things for her and for the children, and basically we are the children's safety net. And the caseworker was kind of like, was relieved, said, you know, well, she didn't have a new case. Because of our involvement in her life, Cruz and Gideon stayed with my daughter. And but yet somehow I got accused for all of this. I begged the caseworkers. I said, please, you don't understand what's going on here. I went through this divorce a couple of years ago. There's a lot of things that go on here. Please tell my daughter I had nothing to do with this. They refused to do with it. In fact, to do anything about it. In fact, the caseworker, her name was Kenny Hutchinson, she said that there was a policy that CPS could not do this. Well, I talked with a couple of other CPS workers, and they basically told me, well, there really is no policy like that, but this is the best practice. And I was shocked. I had to listen to her supervisor tell me how much she loved the children. She wasn't concerned about the family dynamics, but she loved the children. And I was so mad, because I'm thinking, you've never met my grandchildren. I'm the one who spent hundreds of hours, thousands of dollars taking care of them. And you're going to tell me somehow that you have a superior love for these people that you've never met? So I ended up being sued. My daughter filed two false reports against me. She tried to get a protective order against me, and her design was I'm not sure what her design was, but she was vindictive, I guess. I believe that she had influence of her mother and my former mother-in-law that guided her along this way. And she also filed a false police report against me. So I had to go down to the Dallas Police Department. I met with a detective. His name is Officer Quezada. And again, remember, I'm working back and forth in Arkansas, so I'm driving back and forth each week. I'm up in Arkansas, and he says, if you don't get down here right away, I'll have you arrested. And I said, I work in Arkansas. But it didn't make a difference. In fact, he even told me he didn't believe the report, but he had to talk to me anyway. So at this point, I talked with my work, and they said, you've got to defend yourself. I told them what had happened. And everybody knew that I was innocent, that I hadn't done any of this stuff. But so I had to get a criminal attorney down there with me to defend, just to make sure that I was being treated with, not being railroaded by this detective who was trying to look for somebody. And the detective realized, my wife came down with me, realized that we had done nothing. But rather than dismiss every charge, which was they were felony charges, he actually sent me into misdemeanor traffic court. And I'm like, well, misdemeanor traffic court? I'm starting to get these notices from these attorneys about how they can defend me in traffic court. And I'm like, I don't even know what they're talking about. And then I find out my felony has been downgraded to a misdemeanor in traffic court. And I'm like, oh, great. I don't even know what's going on here. So I go into the court, and I'm with all of these people, and I'm thinking, what in the world am I doing in here? And now I've had to pay $1,500 to the attorney to go down to the courthouse with me. And then he says, well, the way these civil courts work, they're crazy. So it basically cost me another $2,500 to have my case dismissed because my daughter didn't appear. But what happened prior to that is that they had a hearing against me for the protective order, in which my daughter, her former boyfriend, the one who later on almost killed her, and my ex-wife all got up on the stand, all committed perjury, lied through their teeth. And the way that these court systems work, you only have so much time to give to testify before the judge. Well, with my daughter's ex-boyfriend getting up there and lying and having to cross-examine him to show that he was lying, my ex-wife is up there and she's going for an Academy Award of some sort. and everything looked wonderful. I mean, all of a sudden, if you were a bystander and if this were the truth, you would think, good God, this guy deserves to be in prison. He probably deserves worse than that. And then, and then my daughter gets up there and she sheds tears and everything else. Of course, in the cross-examination, their testimony falls apart. But then we have 10 minutes left. We had witnesses with us, too. We have 24-hour nursing care, as I mentioned. 2 of the nurses were there. My stepson was there. And my stepson was also good friends with my daughter. And my daughter was all upset that Chris came down. But Chris knew that nothing had ever happened. And then my wife got up first. And what we did, Jodi, we showed pictures. I mean, Karen gave her testimony was accurate, was spot on. She said, this guy is a wonderful man. We have this son. I've never seen him raise his voice. He's very patient. He leaves Monday morning at like 3 or 4 in the morning to go up and drive to another state to work. And he comes back Friday evening because we have to stay in this house because of Matthew. And he's never complained. And then they talked about they showed pictures of me with my grandchildren. And all of a sudden, the judge says, well, you're out of time, but he turns to my attorney and says, well, you can let your client speak. And so she gives me some extra time, and the attorney is asking me questions, and at the end, the judge says, I'm sorry, I apologize, I was going to write my opinion twice, but now I have to look at the evidence. I mean, so I'm thinking on the one hand, you're serious? Now you're going to look at the evidence? You're just going to take the allegations? But she did take a look at the evidence. And my daughter said, well, I didn't get to cross-examine him. So she set another date for us the following week, at which point my ex-wife was no longer there, and the boyfriend was no longer there. It was Stephanie versus me. And her cross-examination, Jodi, there's the part where she's my daughter. She's still my daughter. She'll always be my daughter. And I wanted to cry and just, why are you doing this, But at the same time, I also knew how serious it was. She was trying to ruin my life. She was trying to convict me of a felony. Well, not this one. This would have been the precursor to the felony. She was trying to get me fired from my job. She was trying to just completely ruin my life. And we had no choice but to launch a vigorous defense. And at the end, it was kind of funny because after all of this happened, my attorney had been preparing over the weekend. She had been working on the closing statement, and the judge says, tells my daughter that you're out of time. My daughter's last question is, do you think I'm a good parent? And the judge has said, sorry, this is not about you being a good parent or not. This is about a protective order, and her time is out. And my judge is saying, but there is time for me to give my closing statement. And the judge says, that won't be necessary. And my attorney is mad. And I'm thinking to myself, this is probably good. And it was. The attorney just said, I did. It cost me $20,000. But I mean, and all because of vindictiveness. But you're right. And this is this is the background to say, why am I involved in this stuff? There's a certain part, Jodi, that I said, I made it out of this. Did it cost me money? Yes. Did it, was it one of those things that you wish nobody would go through? Absolutely. But I didn't end up in jail. And my attorney said, do you have any idea how many innocent men are sitting in jail right now because of false allegations? And to me, we've talked a little bit. I'm a man of faith. And I was thinking about in the Old Testament, and I had gone through this in the past. When Joseph, he was thrown into prison by his Well, he was going to be killed by his brothers, and then they sold him to Egypt, and then he was falsely accused of rape, and then he was in prison, and they let him sit there and everything. And eventually, he gets elevated to a position in Egypt where he basically ends up saving Egypt from famine. And at the end of his life, his brothers come down, and they reunite, and his father dies, and his brothers are like, uh-oh, Joseph is going to get even with us right now. So they make up this thing. They say, well, your father told us, please forgive your servants. And Joseph said, am I in the place of God? I'm not in the place of God. What you meant for evil, God meant for good, to bring about this result that you see today, that Egypt was being saved. And the only way I know how to make sense out of evil to some degree is to say, okay, it's been overcome. How do you now use it for good? And that's when I started to say, there are so many people who have no voice. Somehow I made it through. God wants me to be a voice. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to do something. And that's how, that's where I am. So sorry for the long drawn out answer to your initial question. I'll let you go ahead and ask whatever you want to, but that's where I am.